Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I'm really excited to bring you another science fiction and fantasy wrap-up, and once again I feel like I have a lot of hidden gems and underhyped books on this list. There is a fair amount of new releases here, but books that I don't feel like get tons of recognition online, and so if you're looking for something a little bit underhyped, under the radar, hopefully you'll find something good to add to your own TBR. And for all of you that keep leaving comments that your TBR is getting out of hand, sorry about that. There are way too many good books getting published and I can't stop reading them and sticking them on your TBR. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's talk science fiction, and I read 3 Miles Down by Harry Turtledove, and this is a book that I've received for review from Tor Books, and again, one that I had not heard about before. This one follows a biology grad student who gets contacted by this mysterious agency that pull him into this top secret mission, and well, wouldn't you expect, it involves a first contact, and it's basically this fun alternate history story, and I'm really starting to enjoy these like alternate sci-fi stories where they're taking past events and having different science and technology accelerated, and you know, what if we've already made contact with aliens, what would that look like? In terms of a story, I thought it was cute. It had some really good humor to it, the narrative was fun and reasonably fast-paced, but it wasn't quite as memorable as I wanted it to be. It's not the kind of story that has a lasting effect on me, but again, if you're looking for something more underhyped, I'm not hearing anyone talk about this book, and so I was dying to check it out, and I do think it was really fun, just a more cute narrative compared to some of the darker stories that tend to have more of a lasting impact on me. Next, let's talk about The Sleepless by Victor Magnib, and this is a bit of a sleeper hit, pun sort of intended. Basically, we follow a near-distant future where there has been this pandemic that has caused or started because people started to lose the ability to sleep or the need to sleep because they appear to be functional and are able to go about their day and just never needing to fall asleep and still, you know, be productive, functional people with working minds. And so within this world, we follow kind of the events afterwards once this idea of some people being sleepless is more accepted and is no longer seen as a pandemic. And so we follow a journalist who is investigating the suicide of their friend, and they potentially get tied into the story. They potentially might have been more involved than they realize, and the story really goes from there. This is a book that I picked up after reading Beggars in Spain by Nancy Kress, which I previously reviewed in a different video. And if you remember, my commentary on that book is that I like the idea of it, but I really struggled with the science of that book, the way that they explained how sleeplessness was more effective, and some of the biology around that book just did not make sense to me. So this was a great book to read after that because it once again had a very similar setup and premise, but I really felt like the author was a little bit more thoughtful about how to explain it from a biological perspective, and then also to look at how these people might be treated within society. So you definitely get to see the prejudice, the fear, all of that, but then you also get the flip side where you realize that people who can actually still be functional without sleep would be seen as incredibly valuable employees that can work longer shifts, and then you can even still work longer shifts, and then without sleeping you still have more time for hobbies. You can work a second job and still have time to see friends, etc. And I really think that this book leaned into the idea of a society, which ours is, that really values productivity and uses that as a really good means of imagining how a future would take on this sleepless behavior and really use it to make us again more functional and more productive in our daily lives. So I thought it was really well considered and ended up working out, really well for me. I was very much interested in the story itself. I found it to be a very compelling narrative, a good sci-fi thriller, because the premise was good, but often what I find in a sci-fi book like this is that the premise is cool, but the plot can be lacking. In this case, I found the main character to be very interesting. He wasn't one-dimensional, but very complex and nuanced, and the story itself had a really good mystery. There's basically this plot where this person is dead, and did they commit suicide, or is it murder? Was there something else going on? And I was completely pulled into the story and was flipping the pages, or at least flipping the pages in my mind because I was doing the audiobook, and I just could not stop listening and found I was looking for every opportunity to read more because of the fact that I wanted to know what was going to happen next. And so that was a really enjoyable experience, and I do believe this is a 2022 release, so highly recommend it. In my opinion, I don't think a lot of people are reading this one, and I really think that a lot of people will enjoy it. It is smart, it is fast-paced, it's interesting, and very easy to get into, but it does not talk down to the reader in any way. It's super intelligent and definitely one that I would love more people to check out. Then we have Ashes of the Sun and its sequel, Blood of the Chosen, which are both by Django Wexler, and these are the first 2 books in a epic fantasy series. I believe the third and likely final book book is going to be coming out early in 2023, so Orbit offered me the chance to get caught up on this series so that I'm ready to go when the final book comes out. And this was a lot of fun. This series starts out with two siblings that right at the beginning of the story, there is a horrific event that happens in their family. And because of that, one of them is pulled away to take some training, and they end up kind of getting pulled in different directions, and it follows them over time as they basically come of age. This book, in terms of the premise and setup, was very similar to The Rangers of Mazarna, if I'm saying that right, which I recently read and reviewed. And I'll be honest, while this one had a similar premise, I thought it worked much better. This one was very enjoyable to read. I thought it was well paced. The characters, while not necessarily crazy and out of the box, they were well developed and likable and easy to follow. This book in a lot of ways is very tropey, and that's for the fact that this book gave me serious Star Wars vibes. And that's the fact that I'm pretty sure the author took some heavy inspiration from the beloved series and franchise, but I didn't really mind it. Basically, as the one sibling goes off to take training, they pretty much are being trained to be a Jedi. There are literal light sticks that they fight with within this series, and they might as well call them lightsabers because they're basically lightsabers. But that being said, I love Star Wars. I love adventure stories that involve, siblings being torn apart, fighting against, warring bodies, and, coming together. I thought this book had a lot of heart, a lot of fun. And so this is just the first book there, and then I got to read on with the sequel, which I thought was equally strong. Everything I liked about the first book was there in the second, and I'm really excited to continue on with the series because, it was just really enjoyable. It's one of those times that, a book gave me Star Wars vibes without actually being a Star Wars tie-in, which is pretty great to have some that kind of is original, but also not. But I'm not complaining. I had a lot of fun with this. Next, I want to talk about Ruination by Anthony Reynolds. It's the book I received for review from Orbit Books, and this book is a media tie-in for the League of Legends video game, but you can keep watching even if you haven't played the game, because for full transparency, I have not either. My husband's played a bit of it, but he's more of a Dota fan, although he's kind of past that now. But regardless, we both have seen the Arcane TV show that this is somewhat tied into, but I will say that this book does stand on its own. I don't think that you have to have played the video game or have watched Arcane in order to check out this book if you are interested. It's set in the same world, but it's very much its own story. And so I more so picked up this book as a book reviewer. I'm always a little bit hesitant when it comes to media tie-in because I always wonder, will they stand up on their own or will they pale in comparison to what I would call original works? And so I wanted to check it out from that perspective without having the bias of loving the game like other reviewers will when they pick this up. So essentially in this book, we follow a young woman whose uncle has just become the king. He is a very difficult man, and she vows in her role to help him rule. However, things go very terribly wrong when his wife is poisoned by an assassin, and so she goes off to try to find a cure, save the queen, and goes off to the Isles to see what she can do from there. I will say that in terms of a fantasy book, this one felt very classic in terms of tropes. I do think that is pretty predictable, and it kind of follows like a familiar fantasy narrative, and I don't per se have a criticism of the book in terms of where it went wrong, but I do feel like it wasn't the strongest fantasy book I've read. So I've had the luxury of reading a lot of Orbit's new releases, which have been incredible when it comes to fantasy. And in comparison to those ones, this one felt a little bit lackluster. And I really tried to put my bias aside and forget that it was a media tie-in, because again, you really can read it without knowing that. But I just felt like the author felt a little bit weaker in terms of their prose, their storytelling. I personally would love to see another media tie-in done by another author that I think might have stronger prose. I understand this author has a lot of background with the video game, but I couldn't tell if they've actually had a lot of work as an original author, because I'd love to see, say, like a Brandon Sanderson take a crack at this, or another really iconic author. Because I felt like the prose were weak, the character work was a little bit lackluster, and the story itself was just a little bit predictable and underwhelming. And again, I read so much that I'm always looking for something really, something that will wow me or just be so out of the box. And this one just felt very much within the box. It felt like a very safe book to read. But that being said, if you love League of Legends and the studio behind it, if you love Arcane and just want to spend more time in the world, I very much understand that you'll probably just want to check this one out for yourself. And of course, the cover is beautiful, which never hurts, right? And I also want to talk about Gunmetal Gods, and this is an indie fantasy story that I feel like is really underhyped, but I also recognize that Daniel Green, one of the largest booktubers, has done an individual standalone review for this. So really everyone online should already know about this series, but yet there's still people who have not heard of it or have not read it. So if you are one of those, hopefully stick around. Basically, this is a story that is inspired by the Crusades of history, and it's told in a really unique style for fantasy where it is a first-person perspective and a dual perspective. So essentially we get to follow a man on both sides of this war. One is perhaps a little bit more on the right side of things, and one is perhaps more of the villainous character, but we get to see both of their minds and get to follow them and their thoughts. And I loved actually both perspectives. Obviously, like I said, you are meant to be, I think, biased towards the one, but because of my love for dark, morally black and morally gray characters, I really enjoyed both perspectives. I should say that this book is brutal and gritty and dark and will definitely make you uncomfortable. There were some scenes that I'll admit I kind of need to reread the book because I don't know why the author decided to make some very uncomfortable choices, but I do like an author that will make me uncomfortable, so I will give him credit there. I just really enjoyed this book. If I had a complaint or criticism, it's just that I want more of the world because it was a very intimate perspective with the two first-person narration. I just felt like I wanted to see more of the expanding world, but I do believe I'm going to get more of that in the second book, which I also bought, and I'm just really excited to continue on. So highly recommend this one for anyone who wants a story with a unique setting. I should mention that the author brings in more of like a Middle Eastern background to the story and things like that, and like I said, I think it's really going to be expanded out in book 2, but the story is dark and gritty and unapologetic, and I loved it so much. So if you can't tell, highly recommend this one. I had so much fun with. I thought the prose was beautiful. I did it on audio and the narration was fantastic. It really brought the story to life and really brought the characters to life. And yeah, I was completely hooked in. It's one of those times again where I was just dying for every opportunity to read my audiobooks because I just wanted to know what was going to happen next. And I was just flying through it, but I also didn't want it to end. So that's always a good sign. So highly recommend, moving right along. And last for fantasy, I want to recommend a fantasy book that isn't actually a fantasy book, so I'm totally cheating. And that is Bronze Drum. And this is a book that I received for review from Grand Central Publishing, and this is actually historical fiction, but I will say that it reads a lot like fantasy, just without the fantasy elements to it. This story is inspired by true events, which I always think is fantastic, and it follows two young women who were just pinnacle to helping to go and fight against the oppression of Vietnam and actually help to kind of spur the army that led to their independence. So this is a really iconic story, I understand, within Vietnamese history, one that I was not familiar with. I admit that while I am fascinated by Asian fiction, I haven't read a lot about Vietnam itself, and so I was very interested in this. I love a fierce feminine narrative, and I just thought the story itself was very incredible. I have seen other reviewers criticize that this book is perhaps a little bit dry, and I do acknowledge that it does read a little flatter than something like, you know, if you're reading, say, Jade City by Fonda Lee, which is true fantasy. Obviously that really brings the characters to life and has a lot more personality. But if you're used to reading things like the Three Kingdom books and are used to reading fiction that's very much inspired by true events, I felt that this one was far less flat than Three Kingdoms, which I admit I struggled with. So if you're interested in Asian-inspired fantasy or open to Asian-inspired historical fiction that is going to read similar to fantasy, so if you like things like She Became the Sun or the Dandelion Dynasty, which is hiding up there, I do think you should check this one out. I really enjoyed it, and again, I was really happy to kind of stretch outside of my normal genres and try something new, and I thought this one was really great. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to hear of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And I'd also love for you to continue to recommend me your underhyped books that you think that I should check out. If you're new to my channel, I do read a lot of adult science fiction, fantasy, horror, thrillers, and true crime, and I do try to read a combination of new releases and underhyped books, and especially if I can find an underhyped new release, all the better. So hopefully I can put new books on your TBR and fill up your Goodreads shelves obnoxiously with books that you need to read. All that being said, if you want to help me out more, you can give this video a thumbs up, share it around online, drop a little comment, even if it's just a little emoji like a spaceship or a dragon. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, it'll make sure that you don't miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.